I usually say just a few words to kind of, for those of you who aren't familiar with the field of visual and critical studies and with the program at CCA, to kind of orient you, and then I'll turn the microphone and the podium over to Michelle. And I want to begin by sharing an observation that was made by one of our successful applicants to the Visual and Critical Studies program this year. This is how her letter of interest in her in the package of materials she submitted to us began. Today, we are inundated with visual culture. I know somebody in this room is already thinking, that sounds familiar. What we see matters. Our visual environment literally and figuratively shapes us. It tells us who we are and who others are too. Is that kid in a hoodie suspicious? It can limit or expand our vision and sense of what is possible in our lives and in the world. Take, for example, the prisons that masquerade as public housing. This excerpt, I think, makes the political and social stakes of visual critical thinking exceptionally plain. The MA program in Visual and Critical Studies at California College of the Arts is, I believe, the only such program to foreground in its mission statement a strong commitment to both diversity and social engagement. For 14 years, VCS has innovated writing-intensive, theory-driven courses to train socially aware visual critics from a range of backgrounds. Our alumni continue to challenge received ideas and to advocate for social justice as they pursue writing and editorial careers, enter PhD programs, curate exhibitions, educate, collaborate, agitate, make art, found businesses, administer nonprofits, organize public programs, and build vibrant cultural communities. Some of the alumni in this room do all of those at once. This year's graduating cohort includes both, as I said, the MA and dual degree recipients who distinguish themselves by their ability to think and write critically about and through visual culture. Their presentations today will dramatize not only the scope of the research that's possible to conduct in VCS, but also the intellectual rigor of an exceptionally strong cohort. This scholarship has taken shape within a distinctive intellectual environment. Faculty members, artists, critics, curators, and support professionals from diverse programs and departments at CCA, as well as other institutions, have contributed to our graduating students' evolution, and we are profoundly grateful for these alliances. I call your attention to the symposium program, where you'll find these acknowledgments much more fully fleshed out. The students have relied on each other for support throughout their time here, and I want to commend them on the way they've both challenged and nurtured one another to live up to their full potential. Finally, I want to commend Michelle Carlson, thesis director, responsible for training students in the arts of formal presentation. This symposium evidences her professionalism and dedication, as well as the achievements of the students. And Michelle is going to tell us a little bit about the members of this thesis class who'll be presenting today, and then she will introduce the symposium moderators, to whom VCS also extends sincere thanks. Michelle.
Thank you, Tirza, for the generous introduction, and thank you all so much for coming out today. I know it's a beautiful Saturday and you're here, but I promise you it'll be well worth it. We're really excited to be here today to celebrate the accomplishments of this year's graduating VCS Visual and Critical Studies class. It's really a treat for me to be here, both as the instructor that's kind of worked with all of these students for the past semester, but also because I myself am an alumni of the MFA and VCS programs. It's much better to be on this side of the excitement and the nerves, but it's exciting to be here. It's really been a privilege to have the opportunity to work with this extraordinary group of students and to look out and see them and everyone who's come out to support them. Their friends and family, I think we have many people who've come from very far away to be here today. Their advisors, all of the advisors who have put many, many, many hours into the success of these students' scholarship. And then, of course, all of the friends and family of the department and our exceptional cast of alumni that are also here today. It really strikes me when looking out at this community who have gathered here today that something quite significant, innovative, and exciting is still at work in the field of visual and critical studies, and that these 12 students play a really distinct role in that. The VCS students are posed with quite a challenge over the course of their thesis year. They not only have to write a very brilliant thesis, which they're all doing, but they also have to contribute a shorter version of their larger projects in the form of a published essay in the Sightlines Journal. And I do have to just give a shout out to Eric Olson, who is my counterpart in the MP2 class. So I kind of handle the symposium and he handles the Sightlines, but we work very much together in this process, so thank you, Eric. And then finally, of course, the students have to put together this public talk today. And if that wasn't enough, even though I'm sure if you asked the students, they would say that's plenty, that this group of emerging thinkers and writers have managed to continue to collectively push one another. But their work also really pushes the lineage of this program forward, and by default, the field of visual and critical studies itself. Exactly. I think the scope of the projects you'll see here today will make this evident. The students' presentations are transgressive, they're discursive interrogations which pull from the broad span of the visual landscape, whether that be cameras that may or may not be racist, chimeric readings of non-Western comics and folklore, the industrialization of human bodies through 20th century first aid photographs. The narratives and representation of marginalized bodies are interrogated through Chicana lesbian film, visual art within the realm of Second Life, souvenir photos of Native American women and the AIDS body through film. On top of this, our students also will present about New Age aura photography, paranormal photography, the headwear of Mennonite women, and challenging minimalist traditions, and of course, the utopic fantasies in space. Today, we'll have the pleasure of seeing the evidence of a group of students who have dared to become critical thinkers, clear writers, and hopefully dynamic speakers, and who accepted and will today complete the challenge of engaging in a growing field and accomplishing one step in their professional endeavors. The work you'll see here is the accumulation of hours upon hours upon hours of research and rewrites, indescribable scholarly and personal journeys, and the brave landing of an intuitive hunch these students all began to follow last summer. I've been incredibly impressed by this cohort, even after all the work they've done together up until the very, very, very last hours of rehearsals last night. They're still giving critical feedback, deep, kind of intellectual pushing towards each other. Definitely a true example of collegiality. This may be the end of your thesis road and your time at CCA, but this is definitely not a conclusion. But the bold beginnings of what we all know will be exceptional professional journeys. Please help me welcome the VCS graduating class of 2014. So I have the extreme pleasure and with extreme gratitude going to introduce our first moderator for our first panel, Producing Visibility. Melanie Korn is provost here at CCA. She has been at the college in a number of administrative roles for more than 10 years. As Chief Academic Officer, she oversees the faculty, curriculum, and the strategic academic vision for the college. She teaches gender and queer studies in the critical studies, visual studies, and visual and critical studies programs here. She received her BA in art history from Stanford University, her MA in art history from University of California, Santa Barbara, and her EDD in higher education management from the University of Pennsylvania, with a dissertation focused on developing a framework for community-partnered, project-based studio, pedagogy, and art and design higher education. This spring, she had the pleasure of teaching a new grad elective course, Gender and Sexuality in Popular Visual Culture, where she got to talk about things like True Blood, girls, drag queens, and Lady Gaga. And I wish I'd been in that class. Please help me and give a warm welcome to Melanie Korn.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Just say good afternoon. Hi. It's a real pleasure to look out and see such a great crowd here in Timken. And I have to just say for one quick moment what a great pleasure it is for me to be here. As Michelle said, I spend most of my life in a 9-to-5 administrative job, which I love dearly, but I have to say that one of the best days of the week is when I get a chance to go and actually teach. And this year was the first time in probably about 7 or 8 years that I've had a chance to teach a grad class. And I was reflecting the last time I think I taught a grad class, Michelle was in it. So it's been a while. And so it was nice to get back and interact with grad students and yes, to talk about bad pop culture, one of my guilty pleasures. So what I'm going to do is just introduce our first 4 speakers, and then they will give their talks, and then I will moderate a Q&A at the end of that. So first, born right here and raised in San Francisco, not right here, but you know, here in San Francisco. I'm assuming not right here. I don't know. Maybe, you know. Dorothy Santos holds bachelor's degrees in philosophy and psychology from University of San Francisco. She currently serves as an editor for the New Asterisk magazine and the Civic Beat. Her research interests include computational aesthetics, programming, coding, open source culture, and their effects on contemporary art. Elizabeth Moran is receiving a dual degree in Fine Arts and Visual and Critical Studies here at CCA. She earned a BFA in Photography and Imaging from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. She was named one of PhotoByte's 30 under 30 women in photography in 2014 and has won numerous awards, including a Tierney Fellowship in 2013, Magenta Foundation's Flash Forward grant in 2013, as well as a Murphy and Cadogan Fellowship in 2012. Her work has been exhibited internationally and has been published in British Journal of Photography, Hot Shoe International, New York Magazine, and Wired. Colorado Rocky Mountain native Erica C. Gomez is a writer and curator and currently an editorial assistant for Art Practical. With a particular fondness for photography and film, she explores through her research and the intersections of visual and popular culture while examining notions of lesbian visibility, representation, and desire. Primarily engaging with Chicana feminism and phenomenology, she investigates themes of lesbian desire and spectatorship in contemporary independent cinema. Since receiving her BA in Art History, Theory, and Criticism from Metropolitan State University of Denver, she has held curatorial internship positions here in San Francisco, has co-curated exhibitions in Oakland, and has had her writings published in Art Practical and 1111. Finally, Maureen Burdock is a German-American artist who has investigated social issues through her work for more than 20 years. Since 2006, she's been working on a series of feminist graphic fables titled The F-Word Project, 5 Feminist Fables for the 21st Century. Say that 5 times fast. Work from this award-winning series has been exhibited internationally, has been adopted by gender studies and literature programs of various universities, and is slated for publication as an anthology in 2014. Burdock is completing the dual degree in Fine Arts and Visual Critical Studies here at CCA and plans to pursue a PhD in Cultural Studies at UC Davis this fall, with the goal of continuing to publish both scholarly and creative work and eventually teaching the next generation of culturally critical artists and thinkers. So first up is Dorothy Santos. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining. I want you all to take a moment and imagine virtual space as a medium for performance art. It shouldn't be too difficult, considering we all perform a version of ourselves on social networks such as Facebook or Instagram. Even the language that we use on a platform like Twitter suggests something about our identity, our politics. But let's look at a specific virtual space. Let's look at Second Life. Second Life is a massive multiplayer open source virtual platform where users or residents from around the world create avatars and socialize in environments made for and by users. Residents are afforded 3D modeling languages to create and express themselves in a multitude of ways, whether through fashion, body types, and skins, or creating an avatar as another species. They create whatever world they want to see and express themselves however they want to be seen. But how can this space be used as a medium for performance art? In 2007, artist duo Eva and Franco Metez created a series of synthetic performances called reenactments. In this specific reenactment of Marina Abramovic and Ule's piece, Imponderabilia, the duo created digital representations of themselves with a set of instructions for gallery visitors to walk between the two naked avatars, very similar to what you see here on the right side. Although the duo creates in an artistic practice that's a thought-provoking alternative to in real-life performance, I want to share a work that engages in political aesthetics and reimagines gender expression, identity, and representation. In the following year, in December 2008, Misha Cardenas executed Becoming Dragon, a 365-hour mixed reality performance in Second Life. Looking a bit more closely at this piece, the image you are looking at is of a darkened computer lab at the University of California, San Diego. In the middle of the room, a figure stands bathed in red light. The futuristic eyewear fits snugly around their head, pressing a section of short, wavy hair. The eyes are completely covered, suggesting some kind of exercise in sensory perception and deprivation. To the right and left side of the body, wires stream down to the floor like multiple umbilical cords, networked to the system of devices in the room. They indicate the artist's confinement to the physical space. The two large projection screens behind the artist show rooms in virtual space. The most striking and well-lit portion within the frame shows a mythical creature. The dragon, with its metallic-looking skin and glowing features, appears to be looking beyond the frame, into the room you are looking at. The dragon looks as though it's waiting for the figure on the other side. The dragon is an avatar. It is an electronic representation of the human body that stands in the center of the frame. The performance was done in tandem with Cardenas' real-life gender transition, which served as a parallel meditation on her transformation and transition into another body. Gender reassignment surgery requires living 365 days as a preferred gender expression, as well as undergoing hormone replacement therapy. But for the performance, she lived 365 hours, perceiving her environment through motion capture technology and seeing her immediate surroundings through a head-mounted display and real-time video feed. As a part of the documentation, Cardenas stated that the choice of a dragon was related to the history of dragons as magical, mythical creatures, able to shape-shift into different forms and teleport through space. Now, in looking at the physical performance space and makeshift living area, this photograph offers a glimpse into the size and scale. With the visible and multiple tripods and cameras, there's also a suggestion of surveillance on the body. The dimensions of the room also indicate the limited space for which the artist could actually move. On opening night of Becoming Dragon, Cardenas recited some of her poetry for her visitors in both physical and virtual spaces. The bright, almost piercing red light of the motion capture system highlights Cardenas in this photograph, but the majority of it shows the poetry she wrote during her hormone therapy in preparation for her transition. The poem that appears here is titled Notes on Psychoneuroendocrinology, and a particularly noteworthy excerpt reads, quote, Cixous said that woman must write woman's body as an insurgent act. Can we imagine constructing and shape-shifting as a kind of writing, and therefore as a kind of insurgency? Well, not only was Becoming Dragon an insurgent act, it required endurance, which played an integral role in the performance. Although calculated risk is inevitable and part of the creative process, medical specialists warned Cardenas not to engage in this particular endeavor due to possible neurological side effects, such as dizziness, disorientation, flashbacks, and psychosis. For approximately 7 months, though, from May to November 2008, she wore a head-mounted display in timed increments that ultimately resulted in her being able to wear the device for up to 15 to 16 hours each day of the performance. Remember, the performance was 365 hours. That's about 15 days. Specialist recommendation for the wear of this type of technology, 15 minutes. The mixed use of technology allowed Cardenas to experience movement, perception, and sensation through machine vision. The experimental performance also served as a way to test the human body's capacity for physical change, and it also examined the body in transition versus locating specificity to any gender classification or specific type of body. The work was also at the intersections of art, science, and technology. Cardenas refers to Second Life as a way to prototype the body in a way that is impossible to do in physical space. Theorist Gail Solomon extrapolates on the concept and notion of the felt sense in her text, Assuming a Body, Transgender and Rhetorics of Materiality. She states, quote, the body one feels oneself to have is not necessarily the same body that is delimited by its exterior contours. End quote. Through Becoming Dragon, Cardenas was able to create a mythical body that represented a variation of the self. Taking into account this notion of multiplicity, the work also aimed to explore gender outside of the male-female binary structure in an effort to illustrate the wide array of representation the human body could occupy in virtual space. So after contemplating Misha Cardenas' use of augmented and virtual performance, one of the most important considerations that came to mind was how the binary classification of sex and gender as primary defining features perpetuate masculine and feminine gender constructions. From hormone therapy to the 3D printed dragon you see here, documentation of the physical elements of the work also remind us of the plasticity of the body, but how it can be subjected to the boundaries and parameters of medicalization in order for it to become a body that is both legitimized and recognized. The performance also accentuated and blurred a sense of time, space, and movement of the subject, but it also prompted the viewer to ponder the location of the subject and whether or not this subject was a fixed entity through the viewing experience. The artist encouraged the viewer to consider the manner in which perception itself is mediated by the devices and constructs we choose to carry with us through our experiences. As Cardenas occupied various spaces as an effort towards thinking cogently about expressions outside of the binary structure of masculine and feminine, the work was an example of how performance art could serve as a way to affect cultural change. At the time of the work, which was in 2008, there was an estimated 15 million registered users to Second Life. Through the inherently social nature of the work, she was able to connect with people around the world who may not otherwise be able to engage in critical and necessary dialogue in real life. The work not only questioned and interrogated oppressive systems, but mandated visibility of marginalized bodies through language. Whether it's programming and coding that helped run Becoming Dragon, to the poetry the artist performed, the overall work was an enunciation of thoughts and experience of a marginalized body. Becoming Dragon was a performance of language on many levels. In his work, The Location of Culture, Homi Bhabha posits that language and enunciation of a you and an I interconnect to formulate meaning. I'd like to leave you with an excerpt of another poem by Cardenas titled Notes on Becoming, 2 milligrams estradiol, which epitomizes transformation and transition as an inherent quality of everyone's bodily and lived experience. I am becoming someone else, but aren't we all? Always becoming, creating false labels for moments that we're outgrowing as we speak them, learning, creating, building, slipping into our new selves. Thank you.
Good afternoon. So today I'm going to present on truly only a small portion of my larger project entitled The Photograph as Evidence, Contingencies of Meaning and Mattering. But before I begin, please take a moment to study the photograph on the screen. What do you see?
I see like a Ford Bronco and streetlights.
Stevie Nicks. Speck of dust.
What?
A speck of dust.
A speck of dust, okay. Anybody else?
Glitter.
What? Couldn't hear.
Glitter.
Glitter. Oh, okay. Great. Thanks. Glitter definitely can make sense. When you photograph glitter out of focus, it gets big and round. Streetlights as well, the same thing. So we've got both, small things and big things possibly happening here. We can all definitely agree that it's out of focus, right? And it's very dark. There does seem to be a mist at the bottom that could be dust or smoke or, who knows what. I received this image, cavern003.jpg, about a year ago, and it was accompanied by the following text. I had an experience at the Grand Canyon on Highway 66 over the Christmas holidays. You will notice the entities wearing full Native American headdresses. Look at the photograph again. Do you see them? Like you, this text forced me to do a double take. But as soon as I looked again, primed with this new information, I did indeed notice entities wearing full Native American headdresses. Why could we not see them before? I began collaborating with paranormal investigators in the late 2012. In exchange for my knowledge of photography and the technical workings of the medium, one of the leading investigators in the United States taught me the scientific methods for researching the paranormal. From orbs to mists, I learned the difference between an out-of-focus speck of dust and the energy of a spirit. Note the particular iridescence here, which is unlike the rest, which investigators believe is more indicative of an energy than the other orbs that you see there. And after learning things like this, I was trusted to analyze photographs to rule out images that may seem to contain evidence of the paranormal, but actually are only evidence of the normal artifacts of camera, lens, or light. Many photographs came from regular people seeking an explanation or a validation of their suspicions. The rest came from other paranormal investigators seeking a second opinion on images from a recent investigation. In my time as a photo analyst, I have never seen a photograph for which I was unable to provide a plausible, non-paranormal explanation. However, cavern003.jpg has stayed with me ever since. Why could I not see these entities before? These entities materialized out of nothing, transforming from invisible to visible. I began to realize that my training as a photographer was foreclosing possibilities for how the photographic image could come to matter. To this anonymous person, these entities were as clear as day. But to me, and most of you, we were only left with a hazy mist. The text opened up the possibilities for this image for me, and an out-of-focus, dark photograph of nothing produced an image of entities wearing Native American headdresses. I realized that the act of viewing a photograph could be as constructive as making a photograph. These entities matter in both senses of the word when I see them for the first time. And I realized that the simple act of viewing photographs matters as it enacts the materialization of a photographic subject. At its foundation, photography allows for the materialization of light. As you can see in these microscopic images of silver grains on a piece of photographic film, light marks photosensitive materials and leaves a physical trace of a person, place, or moment. This seems like a simple and natural process. Photographic evidence fixes light and therefore proves a person, place, or moment's existence. However, the nature of light is anything but fixed. These images from a recent double-slit experiment demonstrate the indeterminate nature of light. An electron is shot one at a time toward two thin parallel slits. Like shooting a round of bullets, the impact of each and every electron is revealed on the recording device. We would expect to see two areas of impact, matching the positions of the two slits. However, as more and more electrons are sent towards the openings, a wave pattern materializes. Double-slit experiments revealed light's dual nature. Prior to experiments like these, scientists only observed light acting like a particle or a wave, but never both. Scientists realized that the experiments themselves, the mere act of observation, affects whether light behaves like a particle or a wave, or both. This indeterminacy of light seems especially apt with regard to the photographic image. As physicist and theorist Karen Barad looks to theories of light to explain the indeterminacy of all matter and meaning. The simple act of observation marks a moment of production. Within science, an experiment produces particles of light, light waves, or both. The nature of light is existentially dependent on the experiment itself. Therefore, in observing the photographic image, could the subject of a photograph be as indeterminate and existentially dependent as light? Let's step back to the 19th century, when photography was still in its infancy. In the summer of 1875, in Paris, France, photographic evidence was presented to the court in a high-profile trial. Witness after witness took the stand and positively identified the persons depicted in the photographs. However, the evidence under scrutiny was the photographic subjects themselves, the spirits of long-dead individuals. Beginning in the 19th century, the spiritualist movement occurred primarily in the United States, Britain, and France. Spiritualism's core tenet maintained that the human soul survived after death and could communicate with the living. But unlike religion, spiritualists relied on the testimony of spirits in place of a theology. The spiritualist movement represented a modern fusion of science and faith, an avant-garde of new rationality reflecting the recent developments in scientific methods at this time. Over the course of 2 centuries, scientific beliefs had slowly replaced religious convictions, and spiritualists embraced scientific rigor. One leader, Pierre-Gaëtan Lemery, wrote that photography could be the prime instrument to rationalize spiritualism. Lemery believed that photography would allow spirits to give irrefutable proof of their existence, and he implored spiritualists to become photographers, and for photographers to become spiritualists. Soon after, the spiritualist photographer Edward Bouguer caught Lemery's attention. Maintaining an air of scientific rigor, Lemery, along with engineers, chemists, and other photographers, scrutinized Bouguer's work. Finally, in 1874, Lemery championed Bouguer, proclaiming, "One can, with confidence and without a second thought, visit this photographer." One such portrait shows a girl standing stiffly for the camera. She holds a large book just above a wooden table. She avoids eye contact with the camera, but seems unaware of the ghostly apparition in front of her. Wrapped in a flowing gauzy sheath up to the neck, this transparent figure hovers before the child. This equally young spirit raises its arm, seemingly to stroke the girl's face with its silken cloth. The rest of the fabric flows down to the floor, obscuring its unseen body. Below, the portrait It reads, Jane LeMarie and the Spirit of Mademoiselle Finot. Jane LeMarie was the spiritualist leader, Pierre LeMarie's young daughter. I have found no record of Mademoiselle Finot, but she was likely a friend or a family member who died young. However, in this analysis, their relationship with Finot matters less than the fact that Pierre and Jane LeMarie identified Finot's spirit as the subject of this photograph. However, there is more to this matter, or as theorist Karen Barad would say, this nature of mattering. Within Barad's theories, matter is not simply the property of things, but is dynamic and productive. Depending on the act of observation, light comes to matter as an electron or wave or both. Here, Pierre and Jane LeMarie viewed the portrait, and in so doing, enabled the materialization of Finot's spirit as the subject of this photograph. As clients flocked to Bouguer's studio, however, the police became suspicious of Bouguer's work. Within 6 months of LeMarie's announcement, both Bouguer and LeMarie were tried for fraud. Bouguer immediately confessed and condemned LeMarie. However, LeMarie responded by collecting nearly 150 reports from clients who, despite the revelation of the trickery involved, maintained that the subjects of their photographs were indeed lost loved ones. LeMarie presented these eyewitness accounts to the court as a foil to Bouguer's confession. And in so doing, LeMarie called into question the very definition of photographic evidence. While Bouguer may have thought himself to be a fraud, his clients argued that Bouguer's photographs undeniably depict the spirits of the dead. As for the court, the clients asked if identifying a criminal in a photograph was sufficient evidence to convict, then how could the jury rule out the ability for these individuals to identify their loved ones? Both Cavern 003 and this portrait of Jane LeMarie with the spirit of Finot present the otherwise unseeable. Finot's spirit, invisible in Bouguer's studio, appears in the image fully formed and unmistakable. And today, the entities wearing Native American headdresses are equally fully formed to those who allow for the possibility for them to matter. While there are more than 100 years between these two photographs, we are still left to ask, what can photography be evidence of? Eventually, Pierre LeMarie was acquitted. A doctor swore before the court that LeMarie's identification of Finot's spirit in this photograph was unmistakable. Finot's spirit may not have appeared in Bouguer's studio, but as acknowledged by the court, she has irrefutably come to matter. Bouguer and LeMarie's trial demonstrates how photographic subjects are made and remade, stabilized and destabilized. By looking to the indeterminate nature of light, we could expand the possibilities of what a photograph could be evidence of. Photographs as evidence can only attest to the circumstances that surround the act of viewing, and in so doing, photographic subjects materialize out of meaning and take on meaning as they materialize. Thank you.
Hello. This project began with an act of remembrance. I remember falling in love when I was 3 or 4 years old with singer Linda Ronstadt as I listened to her rich, melodic voice merge with the instrumental vibrations of the mariachi band on the album Canciones de mi Padre. When I was 12, I fell for Kate Winslet and Titanic. And back in the summer of '99, when I was just 14, I discovered more than Angelina Jolie. It was then that I realized my feelings of desire for women in general were something I could no longer ignore. But 5 more years would pass, and it wasn't until after I watched the entire first season of The L Word in one sitting that I was ready to make the act of loving on-screen and off-screen reality. My first loves were influenced by these experiences and memories of women in ranchera music, film, and television. Though there weren't any out Latina lesbians visible in mainstream culture while I was coming of age. Today, contemporary cinema provides more possibilities for Latina lesbian embodiment and points of entry for cultural difference. In Mosquiti y Mari, desire is an agent of change that moves beyond issues of lesbian visibility and representation. Written and directed by Aurora Guerrero, the feature-length film Mosquita y Marie received financial support from the community on the crowdfunding platform Kickstarter in 2011. Inspired by Guerrero's own experiences growing up, the film explores the coming-of-age story of two 15-year-old girls, Yoli and Mari. Engaging with feelings of desire and self-discovery, Yoli and Mari struggle to fit in with their peers and maintain familial responsibilities while also trying to make sense of their feelings for one another. Through music and dance, desire cuts across difference to bridge the spectator and narrative characters in the borderlands. Scholar Gloria Anzaldúa explains the borderlands as a space of constant transition, where two different areas, cultures, or social constructions converge upon one another. I argue that desire is an affective and embodied language by which connections generated through music and lesbian desire through dance are expressed on-screen and are understood by spectators off-screen. Filmed in the Los Angeles neighborhood of Huntington Park, sound effects, dialogue, and even music are used to conceive and anchor an immersive, multisensory environment. As Yoli and Mari walk home from school together along Pacific Avenue, the street is lined with retail stores, vendors, and markets. Boldly colored signs give contrast to the dull, heavily trafficked pavement. The blending of Spanish and English spoken by passersby plays with the continuous movement of vehicles, adding to the rhythm of Latin music in the background to localize the scene. Children of immigrant parents, Yoli and Mari are representative of a continuous wave of Spanish-speaking Chicanas whose culture is always being renewed by immigration. Music and dance are recurring themes, and for Yoli, they open the door to new emotions. In a moment of reflection with Mari, Yoli shares a memory of seeing her parents dancing, and soon after, she is wearing her father's hat, listening to music alone in her parents' room. Her mother enters, and they engage in a spontaneous and lighthearted dance. Wondering what her own experience will be like, she asks her mom in Spanish, though I've translated here in English. "What was it like when you met Dad, when you danced for the first time?" Her mother, looking confused, replies, "What are you talking about?" "You know, life stuff." To which her mother responds, "We've made it perfectly clear that the only thing you need to worry about is school. Concentrate on that. I'm not busting my ass all day so you could just throw it away." In this scene, her mother interprets the question as a sign for potential distractions in Yoli's future, and it is clear that her parents will not tolerate any deviation from the future they envision for her. Her mother assumes the distraction looming in Yoli's future is a boy, and in this instance, Yoli's question about her parents' first dance is supported by the perceived problem, a boy, and it is in line with the socially constructed familial and cultural traditions carried out in a heteronormative framework. Meanwhile, this narrative is juxtaposed with an acceptable model of behavior that emphasizes relationships between women, made visible by the dance she and her mother shared. Scholar Catriona Escabel explains, it is through the context of intimacy wrought from female friendships that lesbian desire emerges within the Chicana community. Even though Yoli and Mari never speak of their attraction toward one another, desire is visibly depicted and slowly developed through key moments of lingering glances and palpable tension. The two are alone together in Yoli's home. Mari sits on the couch while Yoli plays Bestia, a song performed in Spanish by singer Julieta Venegas. As Yoli walks toward Mari, she presents herself, and the song begins with the lyrics, "I am transparent." She extends her hand to request to dance, and as the two dance, the lyrics parallel this action as Venegas sings. "Since I introduce myself, I do not need to talk for you to understand me. My eyes will say it all, my mouth says what I think." Yoli stares deeply, lovingly into Mari's eyes, and the film's body, which according to phenomenologist and film scholar Vivian Sobchak, is the material form of the camera, pulls back as they dance. Throughout the scene, they are silent. They communicate only with their facial expressions and bodies and perform an opening unto others. Yoli and Mari have been in the process of reorienting themselves toward each other in order to arrive at this moment. Critical studies scholar Sarah Ahmed's notion of contingent lesbians positions lesbian desire as a contact zone established through touch and is a process of directing oneself toward others. Ahmed explains it as an opening up of lines of connection between bodies that are drawn to each other in the repetition of this tendency to deviate from the straight line. Lesbian desires move us sideways. Yoli performs these sideways movements when she dances with Madi, departing from the straight or heteronormative line enacted by her parents when they danced. Yet the next scene indicates more than the passage of time. It reveals a space of intimacy shared between Yoli and Madi, a product of the dance they shared. The two are now on the couch, and the music has long since stopped. The natural light from the sunset enters the film's frame, painting the skin of their bodies in soft golden hues. Having persuaded Madi to lie next to her, Yoli's eyes are closed and their lips close enough to share a kiss. As Madi tenderly touches Yoli's face, the lyrics of the song Bestia resonate. You'll know what I feel if you only touch my skin. Sobchak explains that watching film is a matter of feeling it wholly from within one's own body and lived experience. This notion disrupts modes of thinking that restrict what occurs on-screen and off-screen to specific sites and subject positions. In this way, the subject position is shifted to include the sensory experience of the spectator, while also acknowledging the experience of the film's body as a lived body that provides actual and possible modes of becoming other than what we are. In this context, I am aware of the shift in my visual perception. My mind's instinctual reaction is to replay Bestia during this moment of intimacy between Yoli and Madi. In this way, I have integrated my own sensory experience into the film's narrative, and as a result, the act of watching the film transitions from a state of passive visual consumption to one of complete engagement. The film's embodiment, then, communicates and engages the spectator in a visceral form of desire that is beyond our own physicality. The film's body captures the textured shadows that take shape amongst the crumpled fabric of the blanket. As Yoli brushes her fingers along Madi's skin, the sudden sound of the door opening sends the two jumping apart to opposite ends of the couch, disrupting the mounting tension between them. The space between them seems too vast for the closeness they just shared. A pillow clearly out of place divides them, creating a metaphorical borderland. For the first time, the background becomes visible as the lace tablecloth, neatly set upon a traditional dining room table, surrounded by wooden chairs, comes into view, alluding to the reinstatement of order, tradition, and family values. This scene is the product of desire born from the dance between Yoli and Madi, and its significance points to the cultural restrictions that impede its progress. According to scholar Peggy Phelan, dance offers a point of entry to encounter that which is beyond the dance itself, referring to this act as passing through, but which cannot take place without the occurrence of the dance. Adopting Phelan's notion of passing through, the dance situates viewers in the borderlands with Yoli and Madi, and it is here, in the borderlands between queer and straight, American and Chicana, past and present, that passing through becomes a space of awareness. And the dance between Yoli and Madi opens onto new desires. Mosquita y Marie creates connections. Connected by the desire from one's own lived experience, the camera's mobile engagement works to produce alternative modes of embodiment that are different for each viewer. Furthermore, the film demonstrates the ways in which Chicana and Latina lesbians forge new visibilities while also engaging with cultural values and histories. Anzalua explains the mestiza operates between cultures, making use of everything, rejecting nothing, and turning the borderland space of ambivalence into a productive site of creation. If claiming a space is also to create, then the dance between Yoli and Madi not only embodies productive connections of desire, but also results in the manifestation of a mestiza consciousness embodied by desire itself. Unlike the unattainable figures that filled my own desires growing up, reading Anzalua's borderlands theory and notion of mestiza consciousness in tandem with Mosquita y Marie creates a site of awareness, a space of production, and an opening for real first loves to take place. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Long, long ago, in a faraway land, there was a king who had 7 daughters, all of them beautiful. Zara, the eldest, then Aisha, Samarina, Parizad, Messina, Khadija, and Nejma, the youngest and most beautiful of all. Her father, the king, arranged for Nejma to be married to a wealthy, powerful foreign prince. But the princess's calling was a spiritual one, and what she longed for was not marriage, but independence. The princess prayed all night before the wedding, and in the morning she found that her prayers had been answered. She had grown a full beard. Her bridegroom rejected her, and the princess was ecstatic. Her father, however, was furious and immediately had her crucified. His other 6 daughters spread the word about their beloved sister's sacrifice, and the legend of Wilgefortis, patron saint of unhappily married and independent women, was born. This tale seems obviously to be born of a contemporary storyteller, longing to erode gender norms in this progressive era of queer and women's rights. Indeed, it is a story in Castle Waiting, a graphic novel by Linda Medley, published in 2006. But it is also the representation of Wilgefortis, the legendary medieval European saint, once worshipped throughout Western Europe. Here you see a crucifix stemming from that practice. This relationship between comics and time-honored folklore, fables, legends, and fairy tales is not just particular to Castle Waiting. It is this correlation that I will expound on here. Much of contemporary scholarship has focused on the comics form as being an outgrowth of mass media and communications, which are the products of industrialization and westernization. Wonder Woman, for instance, was the brainchild of William Moulton Marston. Marston wrote of his hybrid creation, "Women's strong qualities have become despised because of their weakness. The obvious remedy is to create a feminine character with all the strength of Superman, plus all the allure of a good and beautiful woman." Viewed through this lens of industrialization and mass media, graphic narratives from around the world are intrinsically wedded to modernism, the West, whiteness, militarism, superheroes, and colonialism. Rosie the Riveter and Wonder Woman are easily identifiable as such icons. But it is time to decolonize comics. To that end, it is important to recognize that comics are the successors of much older oral or pictorial folkloric traditions from around the world. Pictorial is a word I created to describe customs that combine the use of spoken or written words with the display of pictures. By looking at comics through this historic and transnational lens, more chimeric possibilities come into view. I suggest an important distinction between chimeras and hybrids. Critical theorist Homi K. Bhabha writes that the social articulation of difference from the minority perspective is a complex, ongoing negotiation that seeks to authorize cultural hybridities that emerge in moments of historic transformation. But the trouble with hybridity is that the two parents become invisible in their offspring, which is its own seamless third entity, like this labradoodle here. I argue that hybridity still fits within a paradigm of appropriation and subsumption, which global capitalism relies on in order to perpetuate itself. Chimeras, on the other hand, are combination creatures that appear awkward and even monstrous. Chimerism allows various, often disparate-seeming elements to contemporaneously coexist. I use feminist geographer Doreen Massey's argument that to acknowledge the contemporaneous coexistence of stories challenges tenets of globalization, which promotes narratives of endless progress, flattening space and the people inhabiting it. What comes to light when looking at comics as a chimeric storytelling form that draws on older and global pictorial traditions is multifold. First, there have been storytellers using text or oration with pictorial narratives for centuries. Many of these storytellers have disappeared, and their stories have also vanished or been subsumed. In Castle Waiting, Medley shows a succession of storytellers, one of whom you see here, chimerically linked together. Each teller references another, earlier narrator, resulting in multiple imagined stories from various points in history, coexisting contemporaneously. By doing this, Medley links herself and her work to that chain of tellers and traditions. In every land they passed through, the princesses spread the story of their martyred sister, determined that Nejma's miracle would not die with her. On the contrary, her legend only grew as it spread. In this panel, Medley reveals how valuable and effective oral storytelling was and is. As this association suggests, graphic narratives are tied at least as closely to oral traditions as to conventions of print. The chimeric form of comics allows for the reunification of body with voice. Neither language nor images dominate. Instead, they coexist, each creating their own meaning as well as generating extra meaning via their conjoined state. Philosopher Adriana Cavarero points out that philosophical affinities since Plato have been for an abstract and bodiless universality, and for the domain of a word that does not come out of any throat of flesh. In this philosophical purview, uniqueness is epistemologically inappropriate. Voice in this view is an abstracted concept, belonging to everyone and no one. Orality is the functioning of voice as bearer of language, while vocality challenges the privileging of the voice's relationship with language and encompasses a fuller range of expression. To reattach voice, orality, and vocality to bodies is to affirm uniqueness and specificity. It is an act of rehumanization. While itinerant European storytellers mediated oral tales and medieval nuns and monks illuminated manuscripts, a variety of storytellers' traditions around the world incorporated paintings and songs. Moina Chitrakar, co-creator of the graphic narrative Sita's Ramayana, published in 2011, is a celebrated Patua scroll painter from West Bengal. Here, Chitrakar's songs narrate the story rather than speech bubbles and text boxes. She sings the story as the person next to her slowly unfurls the scroll she has painted. In this tradition, the artists create pictorial works that are often based on mythology and history, while chimerically adding to them their own contemporary voices and social concerns. The form has become more visual and less oral over the past few decades in response to the 20th century propagation of folkloric studies in Bengal, which created a market for painted scrolls collected by the Bengali educated class and by tourists. But in order for the pictures to stay alive and meaningful, they need voice or text to be combined with them in some form. The graphic narrative format, which Chitrakar has adapted her scroll painting style to, as you see here, brings oral and pictorial elements back together. Both comics and scrolls need the contemporary storyteller's voice to animate them. Both are time-based in that panels are revealed sequentially. Not only have modern comics creators like Medley and Chitrakar appropriated formal characteristics of time-honored traditions, but they have also drawn on collective themes and visual semiotics in the crafting of their contents. Chitrakar and her collaborator, writer Samhita Arni, are not the first to retell the Ramayana, one of the most important works of Hindu culture. The Ramayana has been represented so often and in so many different material styles that there are stories told about how many times this story has been told. Neither are Arni and Chitrakar the first to retell the Ramayana from a feminist point of view. They are building upon the 16th century retelling by Chandrabati, one of the few known female narrators of the epic. Chandrabati criticized the hero Rama's actions and told the story from his wife, Queen Sita's, point of view. Here you see Queen Sita as Chitrakar has painted her in Sita's Ramayana. Chandrabhati's work, the 16th century poet, in turn reflects even older women's folkloric traditions. Contemporary scholar Nabanita Dev Sen argues that Chandrabhati likely collected regional ballads sung by women and in turn wove those together to create her telling of the Ramayana. Dev Sen's deduction follows from her comparison of Chandrabhati's epic poem with the oral repertoire of women in the region still in use today. According to Dev Sen, commonly heard in these songs are phrases like, "Women, share Sita's grief among yourselves," and "She distributed her sorrow among us all when she walked to the forest." Similarly, some of the stories that Medley has drawn upon in Castle Waiting can be traced back to storytellers from the 1600s and sooner. Some of these tales, like Sleeping Beauty, which is the story Medley begins her book with, are familiar from recent fairy tale collections, notably those known broadly as Grimm's fairy tales. The brothers Grimm collected stories that were previously published or transmitted to them orally by a variety of storytellers, of which Dorothea Fiemann is one of the most notorious. Here is a portrait of her by Ludwig Emil Grimm, one of the Grimm brothers. In their German Romanticist portrayal of her, the brothers transformed the bilingual French-German innkeeper into a salt-of-the-earth, grandmotherly German peasant woman. European anthologists further absorbed her to become a marketable old woman storyteller archetype. Thus, Fiemann went from this to this. Here you see an illustration done just a few years later by George Cruikshank. In her gradual absorption into the essentialized popular storyteller archetype known as Gamma Gretel, the historical figure all but disappears. Fiemann died ill and impoverished. She did not benefit from the publication of the stories she transmitted. The creators of Castle Waiting and Sita's Ramayana bring storytellers and lore back to life while chimerically adding their own unique contemporary methods and perspectives to the work. By bringing to light tales and tellers that have long been obscured, these storytellers open a window to possibilities beyond superheroic modern Western sensibilities, beyond hybridity and marketability. Much has been lost in the subsumption of storytellers and tellings by more dominant narrators and narratives. But some contemporary comics, like the two you've seen here today, can be used to recover and discover some of those visions, voices, and storytelling practices. You promised you'd continue your story when the dinner dishes were cleared up, and these are the last ones, so we still have to wash them, little Miss Impatience. Are you some kind of story addict? Yes, I am. Thank you.
Settled? Well, thank you again, all of you. That was really wonderful. It was a great way to start us off. So just a couple quick comments from me, and then really I want to just take a little bit of time for questions from you all. So get your thinking caps on for a good question if you haven't already. You know, one of the things that struck me the most about these four talks together, and congratulations on pairing such great talks together. It was a good panel. I think is this notion of the space in between, and how that space in between offers production. I think about, you know, all the many betweens that we saw here just again in the last talks, between genders, between, you know, the real world and virtual world, between this life and the afterlife, between traditional and countercultural physical connections, between spoken words, written words, and images. And throughout all of them, I think the space between the work and the viewer and the critic. And so I think, you know, these in-betweens, and the title of this panel, Producing Visibility, becomes incredibly important. And thinking about, again, the production of visibility discussed here, the production of a trans body or not? Or is it the production of a dragon? The production of a spirit or not? Or is it a simple photographic illusion? The production of lesbian desire or not? Or is this about young female friendship? The production of, again, this sort of visual, narratives, or not, or is it about the written or the spoken stories that go along with them? And so I think for me, as someone who works in this world of visual cultural criticism, it's this notion of sort of what is produced in a work of art or in a popular visual culture, whatever it may be, and is that production about the author, or is it about the viewer? Is it about the critic? And of course, I think, as we saw in all these cases, the answer is in between. Is that the true meaning of something that is produced in that relationship between author and work and viewer critic. And so, I guess just to start off with one kind of broad question, and I was trying to sort of formulate it as you all spoke, and it may be not incredibly eloquent, so I'm sorry, but I'll try to piece it together here. But I think, of these in-betweens, I'm wondering about, is there ever a downside? So thinking again about, Michelle Cardenas' Becoming Dragon, this notion of the sort of watching this gender transformation, but then watching it through this avatar of a dragon, watching, again, these sort of notions of, is this a spirit or is it not, and does it matter? And, so I'm thinking about those in-between worlds between, again, the oral tradition of folklore and the contemporary, visual comic formations of them. And so I think the notion that many of you talked about borderlands, mestiza, the hybrid, the chimera, and these new things that are created in betweens, in these new things that are created, are there things that are lost, I guess? Is there a negative?